Welcome to Rad Health, where we have the conversations that you wish you had with your doctor. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Cooper. I'm a chiropractic and functional medicine physician, a combat veteran, a husband, a father, and a guy who loves nature. So, what I'd like to talk about today is something that came up yesterday. I had someone divulge something in front of me, and I just had to put in my 2 cents. It has to do with GERD. If you've never heard of GERD, this is gastroesophageal reflux disease. You may have heard of heartburn. These are very related. And that's the topic for the day. So when that conversation was had in front of me, it was essentially, hey man, where's my Prilosec? I need my proton pump inhibitors. And I said, hey, what do you got going on? Are you taking sublingual B12? And he said, what are you talking about? So I'll tell you the behind the scenes. So the symptoms of GERD are things like indigestion, bloating, that burning feeling around the heart area, reflux into the esophagus, which also burns. And the reason you get that burning around the heart, and the reason they call it heartburn, is because you have a sphincter at the top of your stomach called the cardiac sphincter because of its location. And when the stomach acid is pushed up under force and it tries to force through that sphincter, the mucus lining that is lining the entire stomach isn't in the esophagus. So when bits of hydrochloric acid and stomach acid push past the sphincter, it actually contacts and chemical burns the esophagus. So that's why it feels like that. The most common treatment for GERD and heartburn are antacids and proton pump inhibitors. A proton pump inhibitor is a drug that stops your stomach from producing hydrochloric acid. If I say HCl, that's what I'm talking about, hydrochloric acid. And that's the acid that your stomach makes to do a bunch of things. One of them is to pre-digest proteins. Have you ever made ceviche? If you've ever made ceviche, that is a perfect example of how this works. So if you haven't, this is how it goes down. You get a bunch of things, fish being the important piece in this conversation, chop it into small pieces, put it in a container, and then squeeze lemon and or lime juice all over it and make sure it's covered with this juice. Well, the juice is acidic. And by being acidic, it denatures the protein in the fish and actually cooks the fish without heat. So that is the same thing that goes on in your stomach. The hydrochloric acid that's produced by your stomach starts to pre-digest the proteins in your food. In addition, it does a bunch of other stuff. 2 really important things that it does. I'll start with the one that also relates to digestion. In the presence of hydrochloric acid, you have something called pepsinogen in your stomach. And in the presence of a hydrochloric acid, it turns to pepsin. That is the enzymatically active form of this pepsinogen. It becomes pepsin, which helps you digest proteins. So 2 ways that hydrochloric acid improves protein digestion. 1, denaturing it itself, and then activating an enzyme that further digests the protein. And if you don't have enough stomach acid, you can't do that. And the other thing is the conversion of intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is a chemical that is found in your stomach, and in the presence of enough acid, it activates the intrinsic factor to its active form, which allows you to absorb vitamin B12. So one of the problems that goes along with having too low stomach acid is you become B12 deficient. B12 deficiency, one of the things that can happen with B12 deficiency is something called megaloblastic anemia. That's where B12, I'll just shorten this, B12 helps to mature your red blood cells. So during the red blood cell production process, it doesn't mature. And so you get this big fluffy red blood cell that doesn't actually carry oxygen well. And so you become anemic due to this poorly formed, immature red blood cell that gets spit out into circulation instead of being completed in its maturation process. So why would you give somebody an antacid or a proton pump inhibitor when they have such negative consequences, this poor protein digestion, lack of ability to absorb B12, and it's the go-to treatment for GERD or heartburn. So I will say that, interestingly, this is a symptom-based prescription or treatment style. And this is another great example of where treating a symptom simply kicks the can down the road and doesn't actually address the physiological problem that's going on that's causing that symptom. So if we realize this extra point that I want to mention now. One of the most common reasons for GERD and heartburn is too low of stomach acid. Yes, you have heard me correctly. Too low of stomach acid. And how that works is that when your body doesn't produce enough stomach acid, the body expects a certain amount of digestion of protein to happen in the stomach because of the pepsin and because of the HCl. When it doesn't occur, the stomach tries to mechanically digest that food. So it churns, it'll squeeze and churn and mush the food up in an attempt to create this level of digestion that it's expecting by the time it exits out of the stomach. Well, with all that pressure from the contraction of the stomach, it forces the stomach juices that you do have, which are insufficient, but you do have some still, up past that cardiac sphincter, creating reflux and GERD. So if we know this now, that too low stomach acid is actually the problem in most cases, certainly antacids and proton pump inhibitors would not be the right choice for a treatment. But actually adding stomach acid to the mix would be a pretty essential piece, and aiding your own body in producing more stomach acid. And there are ways to do that also. You know, this is it's one of those things that makes you take pause and think, what is really at the root of the problem, and how do I address that root? So what kind of things might cause hypochlorhydria? So hypochlorhydria is the term for low stomach acid. If that's the reason, the most likely reason for you to have GERD or heartburn, we should probably know why that can happen, right? So H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, it's a bacteria that can infect the stomach. It doesn't survive well in acidic environments, which is always kind of strange to me. It wants to sit in your stomach, but in order to survive there, it shuts down your stomach's production of stomach acid. And then it eats away at your stomach lining. So you have this mucus lining in the stomach to protect the tissue from the stomach acid. Well, it eats away at that lining and decreases your stomach acid production so it can survive. Well, with this, now you have opportunity for contact with the gastric juices you do have with the actual stomach, not the mucus layer. And so you get these ulcers in your stomach. Not a good situation. Stress is another one. So with the stress response, we have a parasympathetic side of the nervous system and a sympathetic side of the autonomic nervous system. And the way these counter each other is that the sympathetic is the fight or flight side of the nervous system, and then the parasympathetic is the rest and digest side of that autonomic nervous system. Well, if the parasympathetic nervous system is decreased in its activity because you're stressed out, and your body doesn't really know the difference between chronic stress because you hate your job or you're getting attacked by a bear. So the neurophysiological response is going to be the same regardless. So with that, now we have a decreased parasympathetic activity, which part of the function of the parasympathetic nervous system is to induce the production of digestive materials, enzymes, gastric juices, stuff like that. And so by being stressed out, you actually decrease your ability to digest your food. You ever notice you're stressed out and you get indigestion or like intestinal upset? That's why. It decreases your ability to digest via the nervous system. So drinking while eating is another one. Drinking while eating, and the deal there is not that anything bad is happening other than you're diluting the gastric juices that are present. So the concentration of the acid goes down and it's just not sufficient to digest the protein. So it would be best practice to not drink during the eating. If you need to drink, have it before the meal, probably about like a half hour, so you make sure it empties out of your stomach, and then you start eating, or you just wait till you're done with your meal. Depending on what you're eating, a couple hours is a good recommendation to wait to drink after you finish eating, so the food is then emptied out of the stomach and you can rehydrate without diluting gastric juices that are needed for food digestion. Hyperinflammatory diets too. So hyperinflammatory diets are bad for pretty much everything, but it also impairs your body's ability to produce gastric juices. So what are you going to do? What do you do? If you think you might have an H. pylori infection, you test for it. Now the test, you have a couple options for testing. One of them is non-invasive and really simple, and the other is a little more invasive. The non-invasive version is a urea breath test. So there's a special type of urea that have you swallow. And then in that case, if you do have H. pylori, the H. pylori will break down that urea and it'll be off-gassed as carbon dioxide that is measurable with the breath test. Then the other option is more invasive. It's an endoscopy. So they're going to actually put it's a thin tube with a camera on the end of it and put it down your throat into the stomach. And you can actually look via the camera and look for ulcers. You can look for any sorts of damage, and they can actually put a tip on it that can clip tissue as well. So you can do a biopsy of the tissue that is found ulcerated. They can take a biopsy and see what's there. And so they can actually test for the H. pylori itself in the biopsy tissue. So those are your options for testing for H. pylori. So if you have H. pylori, what do you do about it? There are some herbs that can, with some direct action, kill H. pylori. And then a secondary action of the herbs is actually supporting the immune system. So your immune system is better able to kill the H. pylori. You know what else kills H. pylori? Increasing the stomach acid. Now, depending on the level and the length of time you've had the H. pylori or how bad the ulcers are, if you do have ulcers, this is not the most comfortable option, but that's to increase the stomach acid via just taking it. So you can take apple cider vinegar because it's acidic, so it functions in the same way as HCl. You could take capsules of HCl. That's a hydrochloric acid. You could take betaine HCl. It's just another supplement that has hydrochloric acid in it. And those are options. There are preparations, like bitters is a good example. Bitters, digestive bitters. One that I've taken that I actually really liked was Urban Moonshine. I'm sure they still are around. I just haven't taken a long time. But Urban Moonshine had a good bitters that I used to take back in the day. But that stimulates the production of your own gastric juices to include hydrochloric acid, enzymes as well. So that is a good preparatory thing to take before a meal. If you're having any kind of issue with producing enough digestive material, whether it's enzymes or HCl, take the bitters and it'll help stimulate the production of those gastric juices. And then if you just want a straight supply acid, you can take betaine HCl or HCl in capsules. I wouldn't drink HCl, but you can take it in capsules, or the ACV, the apple cider vinegar. Those are options as well. There's two formulations that I've liked for these in the past. Zymogen, it's a company I really like. They have a company called Gastracid, and it has bitters and HCl in it. So that's great. It also has pepsin in it too. So it's really supplying all the stuff that you would need, plus to digest, but then also the bitters to help you produce your own. So it's kind of a mitigating step where it adds the HCl back. So in the moment, you can help digest and create pepsin and also convert intrinsic factor, but then it also helps to get your production going too. So it's kind of a sweet combo. And then HPLR from Apex Energetics is another product I've used in the past with people, and it's done a good job at killing H. pylori infections. So what else do we have? I mean, just lifestyle stuff. Like, for example, don't drink when you are eating. So it's just a different process. If you're used to drinking while you're eating, just stop doing that. Make sure you eat your protein first. So eating your protein first, it just prepares the body to know that it needs to produce a bunch of stomach acid. Because you eat some foods and they don't require a lot of stomach acid because they're not very protein containing. You may not need stomach acid for it. But if you eat protein first, it'll signal the body, okay, we need to produce stomach acid for this one before it gets diluted with other foods. And then you ramp up that production more quickly. Chilling out, figuring out what is stressing you out and fix it. I always hesitate to give stress mitigation advice without being actually face to face with somebody. Because finding out the triggers and finding out the reasons that you're stressed out is really the essential base piece of this. If you don't know why you're stressed out, it's hard to choose the right thing. You can do some hacks and things that just automatically relax most people and try that. And maybe that will be, just enough to get you to realize what a relaxed state is, enough to snowball into that being more of your lifestyle. But if there's really rooted causes for you to have chronic stress in your life, and a lot of people will have chronic stress so much so that they don't even know they're stressed out. They're just in this sympathetic state all the time and don't really know that that's the case because it's their normal. And then something happens and they somehow chill out, and maybe they went in a flow tank or did some ayahuasca. I don't know, I'm just kidding about that, but maybe they did something, and then they find this epiphany place where it's like, oh my God, this is what it's like to not be stressed out. That's really common these days, to have this chronic underlying stress that is just somebody's normalcy. So finding the triggers that have caused you to be stressed out in the first place, important first step in resolving the stressful experience in life. And then in the meantime as well, take a sublingual B12, because while the intrinsic factor is not being produced, before you get your own HCl production back online, and just in this interim, don't risk becoming B12 deficient. And if you take B12 sublingually, and all that means is that you put it under your tongue. So lingual is just the Latin root for tongue, and let it sit there until it dissolves. And it'll actually dissolve in the mucous membranes between your tongue and the floor of your mouth. And so it goes directly into the blood. It doesn't have to be absorbed into the bloodstream via the stomach and digestive tract, which if you don't have enough HCl, enough acidity in the stomach, you won't convert an intrinsic factor and you won't absorb it in the stomach. So if you can just absorb it right through the membranes into the blood, you're good to go. And if you do that, obviously choose a methylated form of B12. Most time you'll find these, it's going to be methylcobalamin is the methylated form that you'll be looking at. And that's your deal. So I hope this sheds some light on the really common condition of acid reflux, heartburn, GERD, that whole spectrum of problems, and how the mainstream treatment of this condition cluster isn't awesome. And there's much better stuff out there that, it's not super expensive. It's not, any kind of crazy treatment that you have to go through. You just got to know to do it. And if this were a G.I. Joe episode, I tell you that knowing is half the battle. All right. So I hope this was useful for you. If you found this to be a useful episode, I'm glad. Comment, like the episode. Make sure you're subscribed. If you think it'd be useful for somebody else, shoot the episode to them and have them subscribe as well. Let's build this community of people looking to generate health in a natural way. In the meantime, have a spectacular rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one.